Welcome everyone to the Thursday morning series. Jon Taylor is joining me today. It's always great to see you. You always have fantastic content, and I'm anxious to hear what you've got for us today.
Thank you. Um, so if you'll forgive me, I usually read off my tablet, but it's not syncing with the notes
Oh
that I
no.
took. So I'm going to be reading off my screen today. Um, so today I want to look at this is something I've been thinking a lot about over the last month, how self-regulation fits into two-person psychology. Because when you look at self-regulation gone awry, um, this is where, your classic porn, sex, fantasy addict comes from. These are over-regulatory, self-contained regulation behaviors. And for those of you who are in a relationship or trying to be in a relationship with someone who struggles in this way, you've probably pulled out fistfuls of your hair, um, running into that kind of brick wall experience. Like, I cannot get this person to interact with me in a meaningful way. So it's one of those maybe seeming contradictions that I just kind of want to walk through, and I want to look at the place that self-regulation has in two-person psychology because I actually do think it's paramount to adults being able to have good relationships, and I think it's foundational to the ability to co-regulate. So while co-regulation, I would say, is the gold standard. If you want to regulate an emotion fast, effectively, and thoroughly, bringing that emotion into a safe, attuned relationship, there's nothing like it. We see that people's cortisol levels, heart rate, muscle tension goes down faster when they're in a co-regulatory relationship as compared to self-regulation. So while it is the gold standard, it doesn't exist independent of other factors. So if you look at it this way, co-regulation is an evolutionary stage that relies on the solidness of the preceding stages or preceding abilities to do it. So I'm coaching on my son's mountain bike team again, and we drill into these kids all the time. Basics, basics, basics. You guys are going to get sick of this. You're going to think you're too cool to practice the basics, but really, this more advanced stuff that you're looking to do on the trail really relies on mastery of these basics. So, some definitions: self-regulation, something organizing and regulating itself without intervention from external bodies. So again, you can hear in that to the extreme, this is where you have addiction. This is where you have what I would call like anti-dependence. But the core of that, I can organize and I can regulate myself without relying solely on external sources to do that. It's pretty important. Another definition: control of one's own behavior, emotions, thoughts that allows for goal-directed behavior. In other words, the ability to think before acting, which is where I see the role of self-regulation and effective co-regulation. So if you think about it just from a developmental standpoint, we don't learn to self-regulate first as infants. And in fact, we don't learn cognitively anything about our life, our surrounding as infants. We are plunked into a relationship with our caregivers, and that largely determines which parts of our regulatory systems are going to be selected for development and which ones our brain will prune that don't get used. So, just a quick primer on how co-regulation works for children in the larger scheme of things. So, and we talked about this with object relations theory a little bit. So, I won't go over it in depth, but in essence, the infant and its caregivers, the infant is born merged with the caregivers. No concept of separateness. So as goes the parent's body, so goes the infant's body. Um, if the parent is attuned, what they start to do instinctively from day one with the child is they start to reflect and narrate the child's internal states. Oh, you look sad. Oh, that's so frustrating. Somebody needs cuddles. What that does is it builds the building blocks as the child is differentiating. That's how the child first gets a sense of how to organize themselves internally. My favorite evidence of this is a line that we have used with we've tried to use it with our toddlers and our older boys too. Um, when there's a spill, when something gets broken, oh, accidents happen. And what we're trying to narrate is like, you are not bad. This is okay. We can figure this out. So you can see my 4-year-old especially adopting this organization because now when she intentionally takes something, breaks something, whatever, her response is, well, accidents happen. So you can see the borrowing of the organizational structure. She's making it her own. She's trying to figure out what exactly does this mean for me. So co-regulation, effective co-regulation in early stages leads to the ability to be able to effectively self-regulate. I can name my emotional states. I know what my body states are and what they mean, and I can attend to my needs. That then sets the stage to enter again um, in adulthood a mature co-regulated relationship. In other words, when I can self-regulate, I have the feeling of I'm not going to lose myself when I merge with this other person. Essentially, when push comes to shove, because of how I can take care of myself, I know I'll be okay. So, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that allows us to take helpful risks in relationships. So differentiation is essential to secure functioning, and it's one of the main building blocks of intimacy. So self-regulation is part of our differentiation. I feel independently from you. This is again paramount in early days of recovery. For a partner who is betrayed and is experiencing this disproportionate emotional load, right? Because I just got read in or I just found out all of these secrets that I didn't know before, and you can see your partner not not responding the way that you are. They're not struggling the way that you are. So a differentiated person can look at that and they can say, instead of questioning the reality, am I sane? They can look at their partner and them and say, well, of course, I feel what I feel. I'm in the position that I'm in. They can track their own timeline. That's hard to do when you're faced with the trauma of disclosure, by the way. So, usually if that skill or that ability is something that you have really well developed in you, often it takes a little while for it to come back on board after the trauma of discovery. You can also look at differentiation from a person who is recovering from addiction. The differentiated addict in recovery will dive into their own program. They will set their own goals, their own needs. They will have a functional relationship with a sponsor and a therapist where they can kind of gauge how am I doing, what do I need, and they can fathom different from their own needs what their partner's needs may be. So this is the classic, my partner wants me in 14 meetings a week. Okay, I can understand that actually may be more about my partner's safety, my partner knowing that I'm taking this seriously, than it is about my own need for 14 meetings a week. I can actually feel that would be a lot for me. So the differentiation is the ability both of us have to plant a flag in the sand, not because we're going to have a fight and see who wins, but because we know who we are, and that's how we start to find each other. So we can learn. Uh, Sorry, let me back up. When co-regulation is not effective or sufficient in infancy, you tend to see people who either lean too far out of relationship. They're what I would classify as anti-dependent. Relationship, needing other people, emotions are all weakness. So I stay as far out of it as possible. I'll mind my business, you mind your business. And then you have the middle, which is we would call like interdependence. There's this ease and comfort with attending both to the self and the other. And then I know in these circles the word codependence is not our favorite, and I'm simply using it in the term of leaning too far in. So a codependency or a merging when it comes to emotional regulation. I can't get my bearings without firm contact with someone or something else. Not to pathologize at all, this is just describing how we either run to or from relationships. So interdependence requires some personal ability to shift states due to the nature of relationships and how we function in them. So the more people you add to a system, the exponentially more complex, um, and maybe even difficult to steer that system gets. So, we may ask all the time, isn't it just easier to be by myself? And I think when you look at work on the front end, yes, it's always easier to do stuff by yourself on the front end. However, the long-term benefits of being in a relationship are where we start to weigh, is it worth the work? There are benefits you get from a long-term intimate relationship that you just can't replicate anywhere else. So, like anything else, I'm thinking about my 15-year-old who's learning how to drive now. Um, there are it was funny when he first started, he was asking me, the car that we have for him to drive, um, can I bring my music in the car? It's an older car, so there's a CD player in it, and he's like, I'm gonna have to get some CDs, so I have good music to listen to. And it was funny putting him behind the wheel the first time. He would tell us, "Don't talk to me." He definitely didn't want music going. He didn't want multiple people in the car because there was a heightened anxiety. There was a muscle memory he had to learn. There was all sorts of stuff flying his way that was actually pretty stressful when he started driving. So his first few drives, it was like he would drive for 5 minutes at a time, never at night. Um, and as he develops some more ability to tolerate and process the feelings and sensations that come with driving, he started on occasion. He'll say, "Can we turn some music on low volume?" Um, stuff like that. So and lots of anxiety up front, hard up front, but hopefully he emerges on the other side with a greater degree of freedom and a greater degree of ability in his life. So our relationships are the same way. Here are some of the things that we have to be able to self-regulate through in relationships. There is always uncertainty because human beings are unpredictable, and there are a lot of forces outside of our control. So whether you realize it or not, each day you kiss your significant other goodbye and you walk out the door, it is not guaranteed that you will reunite at the end of the day. Something could happen to your car, your bus, your train, and I'm sorry if I'm increasing everybody's anxiety, but just to illustrate the point, if we can't tolerate uncertainty, and in the emotional realm, I had an experience like this yesterday with a good friend of mine. I opened up and got vulnerable and told him some things about myself and my views that I had not before, and I knew that he felt differently than me. Um, we did this through I did it through a Marco Polo just because of our time difference. So I found myself about every hour checking in. Has he watched it? Has he watched it? Has he watched it? Now, a big part of me had like 98% confidence that this was going to be something that brought us closer together and it would not be something that hurt our relationship. But there was uncertainty, and I had to be able to talk myself through. I had to be able to breathe and calm things down. Vulnerability is another one of those things that comes with relationships that we have to learn how to tolerate. If you're going to lead in a relationship and wield co-equal power, which is secure functioning, you have to be able to tolerate the risk that comes with wielding power and being responsible. So there's just as much vulnerability saying to your partner, "Please don't hurt me. I'm relying on you," as there is saying to your partner, "Hey, you need to knock that off because we agreed we wouldn't do that." So there's vulnerability, not just from the "you could do something to me" standpoint, but vulnerability from the "hey, I'm taking a stand for the principles that we've agreed to, and I'm asking you to get back in line." So I call this our self-centered under stress bias. So the more stressed we get, the more self-centered we get. Everyone will default to protecting themselves. And if you aren't regulated well, or adequately, you aren't thinking, and you will not think accurately about another person. So there's this bias in all of us. Relationships are very stressful, families are very stressful. Without the ability to self-regulate, we will become self-centered. We will become selfish. We will prioritize ourselves over others, and that doesn't work in our relationships. You'll be a raw nerve, and you'll either be requiring everybody in your system to organize around you or leave you. Another thing we have to be able to tolerate is strategy. So, relationships take work, relationships take thinking. Um, we have to be able to strategize both with another person, which requires synthesizing different viewpoints, different needs, different approaches, different talents, abilities. And we have to be able to strategize with each other. So we have to know ourselves and our partners and manage one another accordingly. So we have to know what the parameters are that we do and do not do well in. What are the best approaches to your partner? What are the best approaches to convince your partner of something without manipulation, without coercion, but only through attraction, only through negotiation? So, thinking and strategizing requires engagement of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Now, we have built a lot into our societies that require people to have a functioning DLPFC, but it's amazing how quickly that thing goes offline when you're under stress, when you're under threat. Like it's one of the first circuits that the brain wants to cut, especially when you're not resourced, when you're not used to taking a breath, when you're not practiced. There's literal like neuronal growth that grows between the amygdala and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and other brain structures when you practice regulating your nervous system. So it gets bypassed when we're unregulated, and you can't think and you can't strategize. So you're taking one of the most complex organisms known on the planet, the human relationship, and you're essentially covering your eyes, plugging your ears, and putting your foot on the gas and hands off the wheel. Like you really have to be able to catch and throw and think down the road. The last thing on my list, this of course isn't an exhaustive list, but a few things to think about. There's unreliability in relationships. Even the most carefully crafted relationships that I have seen, the most attuned partners that I have seen, they can't hit the target every time for each other. So there's these margins for error because 100% showing up for another person is impossible. Again, we can construct a relationship that plugs a lot of the gaps, that deals with a lot of the problems. But again, because there's uncertainty, because there's vulnerability, because human beings are unpredictable, there's always a gap. So you have to have the ability to self-regulate. So there's a margin of error inside of you. The thought when something awful happens in your relationship or something that really surprises you or hurts you, the thought of maybe they're not malicious, that doesn't come from the part of the brain that's freaked out. That comes from the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which says, hey, there's a pattern here, there's a history here, there's a track record that we're building, there's commitments that we've made. Same thing when you mess up. There's no way my partner will ever forgive me. They're going to be so mad at me. That front part of your brain can say, yeah, you've messed up. Yeah, your partner may be angry and they might have a right to be. The quicker you get on this, the less damage there is down the road. So let's do the right thing. So you have to have a personal margin inside of you to bridge some of those gaps that the relationship can't. That personal margin inside of you is also what allows for your partner to be able to have authentic emotional responses so that both of us don't get the feeling that we're in an emotional straitjacket to be in this relationship. No, you can be angry because I can take it. I get it. You can be anxious. You can be sleepless. You can be sad because that's not going to totally consume me. I understand that that's your feeling, and I'm here in a supportive role. So just really quick, I'm going to outline some basic skills to get started in self-regulation because this is such an important, there is no relationship without the ability to self-regulate. So a basic one, breathing. I like the 4-6-8 technique. That's breathing in for 4 beats as full of your lungs you can. Hold it for 6 beats at the top of the breath, and then exhale for 8. So the longer exhale than inhale is shown to engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the slow down, the rest, and digest. Um, I literally carry proof. I carry data in my pocket I'm tracking my heart rate variability. I carry proof that when I breathe, it does make a difference, even if it's slight, in my stress levels, my heart rate variability, my resiliency. Releasing muscle tension. So there's lots of different ways you can do that. You can learn progressive muscle relaxation, which is a series of squeezing and relaxing, stretching, walking, running, dancing. There's sometimes after a particularly intense session where I'll come into my office and I'll do like windmills, toe touches, trunk twists. Um, it feels a little bit awkward at first to move like that, but when you can pay attention to where there's tension in your body and you can vigorously attend to that, release it, it does make a big difference. Learning to eat when you're hungry and rest when you're tired are some good modes of self-regulation. And then lastly, I would just say our relationship with the truth. So distortion is a left brain attempt to regulate by changing the nature of reality. Just think for a minute about the stress load in that. Think about how difficult that is to change reality and how easy it is for us to distort, lie, misperceive, willfully misperceive. So I would say a basic skill of self-regulation is to learn how to put ourselves in reality so that we can actually tolerate what we live in. You can't regulate that which you cannot feel. So you got to work your steps. You've got to learn to get and stay honest. You have to work with a good sponsor, a good therapist. You have to learn how to become accountable in all of your relationships. That's how you start to see the reality that you live in, and it's that old coping trope. When you're on the top of the cliff, you worry about falling. When you're falling, you worry about hitting the ground. I think it's a pretty reliable part of the human organism that once I'm in the situation, I start coping, even if it's not pretty. But the momentum starts to go in that direction of coping once I turn and face, or once I allow myself to step into what is real. So I'll probably be revisiting some more two-person psychology and maybe some more self-regulation, but that is where we'll end today.
And really helpful when you're talking about the basics. Earlier, I don't follow all the basketball stuff, but like, when they're doing all the, categories, brackets or whatever, I always go, who's got the best free throw averages? Because that's the one thing you can go practice all the time. Like that is such a
Yeah.
fundamental basic. And I just go, like I would always, I'm going to pick the team that has the best free throw ratio because they've practiced, they've done the basics, they're doing what they need to do, and they're more likely to win. But yeah, anything, I run, if you go to a running coach or a running clinic, they're going to look at your like all of the fundamentals of your mechanics, which is the basics. It's like, and breathing and stride length, everything. It does come down to basics. So I do think it's really important. When you were talking about the relationship with truth, and I thought it's so easy to distort either way, and it could be that, oh, it's not as bad as I think it is or whatever, so like kind of pushing or it's the, oh, that person did that maliciously, they got up this morning and they intended to hurt me. I mean, so I think that's really a hard space to navigate, especially when we're going like, this is happening and it's really horrible and terrible, and I need safety right now, or that person's going to be really mad at me when they find out, XYZ. So that's a hard space to get to, but it is key to honest relationships, living in integrity for those of us, on a recovery path, and but also that kind of gracious space of like, that person, may be really stressed out or whatever, and maybe that wasn't really what they intended to say or how they intended to say it. I'm having a reaction to it, but could I just say, is that really what you were, meaning? And I think about, I want the gracious reception when I muff up. So I'm trying to be even better about like when somebody's doing that, being curious about like what's really going on with that. Is there's probably a different message underneath it. So, but a hard space to get to, but really important. This is great stuff, and I know for sure the more regulated I am, the more bandwidth I have for dealing with things. But in program we talk about hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed. Like getting enough rest, getting enough. If I'm taking care of myself, if I had a bad night of sleep, I'm going to have a smaller bandwidth. Having that awareness of like where I'm at with things is part of my self-regulation. I know for sure that, I better be a little more cautious with things if something's going on, because I'm more likely to want to react. Even if I don't, I'm more likely to have that be the knee-jerk reaction and go, wait, but building in that space is huge for I don't like making amends. And so like I've learned that if I just slow it all down and can kind of think it through, that helps me, figure things out better. So use my thinking part of my brain. Okay, first question. My essay husband does not believe in the traditional way of recovery. He says essay meetings, CSATs do not work for him. He did go for 2 years to meetings and a CSAT, and we did a disclosure and impact letter. But then he relapsed. He was never in recovery. He was sober for a year since the relapse was a year and a half ago. He has been in active addiction. He does go to one meeting a week. Is it possible that traditional way of recovery does not work for everyone? We are separated because I'm not willing to live with an active addict. Thank you for writing this.
Yeah, yeah. So that last statement is the first thing I want to respond to. There's differentiation, right? There's self-regulation. I have a parameter here, and I'm not willing to live with an active addict is not the same thing as outlining, micromanaging, giving your partner a to-do list. It's simply saying this is where I stand. And, in the sense of boundary, the best way to be able to approach me is not to live in active addiction. So the short answer to is it possible that the traditional way of recovery does not work for everybody? Yes, absolutely. Um, however, um, in recovery, we learn how to go from passengers to drivers in our own life. I love the wisdom from AA, take what's useful and leave the rest. So, recovery is not a passive thing. I'm waiting for somebody else to innovate what I need in my life. Like 100% of the people that I see who get into strong active recovery have at some point the realization that I'm going to have to be willing to do anything and everything to solve this. I remember when I was relatively young, and this is where my shame and my fear was at when I started confronting my addiction. I thought my life was going to be over. And I don't remember all the specifics, but I looked at my culture, I looked at my family, and I was like, when I start getting honest, which I knew I had to do, when I start getting honest and I start addressing this, I might be outcast. Like people may not be able to handle this. And the feeling I had was, if that's what it takes, so be it. Because I'm sick of how it feels inside. I'm sick of living this way. So, the modes and methods of recovery, research has not shown one to far outshine the others, but I think it has more to do with engagement from the person. I think it has more to do with competency in the treatment that they're seeking. So what I would say here is, uh, if you keep finding things that don't work for you in recovery, what does it say about you when you just hunker down and say, well, I guess this is as good as it's going to get? That seems to be lacking maybe some personal responsibility. There's lots of different alternatives to, like, say traditional 12 steps. You have refuge recovery, which is more of like the Buddhist approach to getting sober. You have things like smart recovery, which they would refer to as like a secular. There's not higher power talk. It uses positive psychology and behavior change methods and group process. And it's a support group to support addicts of all stripes in getting sober. There's all sorts of different configurations of 12 steps and CSATs. Not all 12 step groups are created the same. Not all CSATs are created the same. So I find, again, the people who really succeed in recovery, they usually, I can't think of many that just took off and ran with their first therapist or took off and ran with their first 12 step group. There was this period of like I would call it trial and error, but not like I'm finding what works, more like I'm finding what's a good fit for me and really speaks to me and supports me in the ways that I need. So, yeah, there's not a ready-made recovery that works for everybody, but there couldn't be. So, I think it really comes down to if this is a way that you, oh, I can't even say if you want to live differently, because in the depths of addiction, we really don't, we can't even fathom like what a good life would look like. So it's really like, oh, if you're sick enough of doing what you're doing and the consequences have piled up enough and you're ready for a change, you'll figure it out. And there's lots of great places to start. That's the amazing thing to me, like with parenting, with marriage, with addiction recovery, like there are literal publishing industries that only write about that kind of stuff, and there's such good information out there. You just have to open yourself to it. You have to. It's like sorting through the bins at the Goodwill. You just have to be willing to look through and find that treasure that you're so glad you got your hands on.
Yeah, I was thinking, in 12 step, we talk about it works if you work it. And I hear a lack of being willing to work. And in the big book of 12 steps, it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And basically, it's those who do not, or are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. It comes down to, am I willing to be honest? I'm sorry, it sounds like your husband is going um very in a very disempowered way. Oh yeah, like it didn't work for me, rather than going like, I need to find something that does. And John just said, we can't in our addiction fathom something better and different. And I often say no addict changes until the pain of change is less than the pain of staying the same. And right now he's choosing the addiction. I I often say, if you could see how good life can be, and it's not, like without its problems, but if you could see how good life would be, every addict would be going like, yes, I want that, I'm all in. But we can't. We're so, so stuck in our ways, and it's really sad. So I'm glad for you that you are, taking care of you. I'm sad for him that he's not choosing a different way of life. He doesn't even have a clue what he's missing. But I'm, Bill Wilson, who's one of the founders of AA, said the only word in the 12-step book that he would change is rarely, because it's never had they seen someone who has thoroughly followed their path. And here's the deal, it's a suggested, like, thank goodness, because like I still bristle when somebody's telling me what to do, but it's a suggested form of, here's a suggested plan. You can, just like you said, take it or leave it, take what you need, leave the rest, all of that. So what I hear is somebody who was probably sitting in meetings, warming a seat, hands folded, going like, yep, yep, I'm not like these people, rather than, gosh, these people are on a path that's different. I don't know how to do it, and I'm willing to listen. So, sadly, lots of addicts never choose to get the help that they need to be on a different path. We always hope that they do, but everybody has to make their own decision. Okay. I stood by my partner for 33 months while he was in active addiction through repeated betrayals and avoidance. 2 months ago, I finally pulled back, not to punish him, but because I no longer felt safe. I was dysregulated, angry, and deeply hurt by the ongoing breaches of trust. Now that I've set boundaries and followed through with consequences, he's pulling away and casting me as the villain. Why does this happen? Why is the person who stayed and supported him now being resented for finally saying enough? I set those boundaries to protect our relationship, not to have him sabotage it.
So, the I think to understand the answer to that question, you have to think of how systems work. So systems don't care how the individual components feel. Systems care whether we're getting familiarity. So what I make up on the back end of what you're saying is it was a 33-month journey for you to find your limits, to find your voice, and to find your boundaries, which is great for you. When you think about it from the system perspective, how much of that system was built on, maybe from early on, this reliance that both of you had on you being easygoing, you having infinite patience, you never indicating that you might be headed for the door, no matter what happened. Usually what I see if there are one or both parties in a system like that, generally the feeling that pervades is one or both of us can get away with whatever we want because there's no consequences. So this is just it's human behavior, one person psychology. If you want to see someone get really mad, take something from them that they've had, whether they should have had it or not, or whether they actually had it or not. Every now and then in the news, you'll see that like the incorrect lottery numbers were announced,
Oh,
and you have people thinking, my life is going to change. Not that winning the lottery is a blessing. There's a lot of research
no.
that says it ruins people's lives, but um, I never had the money in hand, never should have, but I thought it was going to be mine. And a lot of people will experience a grief. Say same thing with the relationship. I saw us getting married. I saw us having happily ever after, and you didn't. You'll experience a loss that, if not on par, is very similar to if I'd actually had the money in hand or I actually had the marriage and now I lost it. So this system that was cozy and warm and predictable. Sorry, I take back cozy and warm. It was predictable. It was familiar. Everybody knew their role. Um, I hope you can hear the I hope you can hear the support in my voice. You ruined it from the system's perspective. You are the one who said it's not going to work this way anymore. Now I stand by what I said earlier. Good for you. Good for you. What are we doing in a system that doesn't meet our needs or doesn't help us? That's the mature thing to do, is to step back, to have boundaries, to say I can't operate under these parameters. You said I've set these boundaries to protect our relationship, and you're right about that. If you're starting to feel like I'm at the end of my rope and I want to kill you more than I want to love you, it's time. It's time to pull back from what you can't do anymore. So often you'll get that you ruined everything, you're the villain. Um, that would be from the immature stance on the relationship. Well, we should just have each other forever and ever and not have to worry about how we treat each other because we're entitled to it, aren't we? And what you're saying is, you know what? Nobody has a gun to my head, and they don't have a gun to your head either. I'm here by choice, and this choice isn't making sense for me anymore. So I'm not here. I'm not here as much. So often you'll get that pushback because of the disruption to the system. You can get that pushback too because like I said, my last point for self-regulation is the reckoning with reality. Um, in any relationship, when one person says, "I'm not satisfied" or "this is not working," two people are responsible for that. Always, always, always. Um, we co-create the relationship every step of the way, whether we feel like we're in control or not. That's just the nature of it. So some people have difficulty seeing their responsibility. The correct response, even if you are not aware of what's happened or you don't remember some kind of rupture with your partner, if your partner comes to you and says, "Hey, Saturday was awful. You were so mean to me," and you don't remember, the correct response is, "I'm so sorry. Tell me what happened. I don't remember. I can't place, but I'm so sorry I made you feel that way." So again, there's this sensitivity and there's this recognition that, like, if you're saying there's a problem in our relationship, there's a problem in our relationship because nobody's the king here. We both make this up as we go. We do this together. So that anytime I see anyone in a coupleship pointing a finger firmly this way, and at the very least not saying, "Hey, we seem to have a problem with this," and really mean it. Anytime I see a finger pointing this way, the person pointing the finger has a problem with personal responsibility. Even though they may be right about this is a problem. Again, the relationship is co-created. And so if we're not holding that way, there's a lack of maturity. There's a lack of touch with reality.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you to elaborate on that a bit. So if I'm a betrayed partner and this person is staying in active addiction, I'm kind of pointing the finger because I'm kind of going like, this is a problem. So help me understand in the two-person system.
Yeah. So if you're pointing the finger and saying you are the reason why our marriage isn't happy, well, you're still choosing to be in a marriage that's not happy.
Okay.
So yeah, while your partner has betrayed and all of those things that are inexcusable, no one has a gun to your head.
Okay.
So
That makes sense.
we are unhappy only because it's largely true, but it's not completely true. And you can hear it in what this partner is saying. I got to a point where I said, "Yeah, I can't put my happiness in your basket and rely on that. Maybe I never should have. So if I start putting my happiness in my own basket, I make different choices for myself. I'm doing something different now."
And you're right. I say this to partners, because I think boundaries are very challenging. Addicts have none of them. But
Yeah.
partners, when they're starting to hold, when they identify and, have a plan, it's still hard to hold because,
Yes.
somebody is going, I said, the system is going to fight you extra
Yeah.
hard. It's going to get worse instead of like it should get better. No, it's going to get it worse because somebody's going to be trying to pound down that door and go like, nope, no, we need to go back.
And I would imagine for this person, this probably isn't their first run at saying, you know what, this isn't working. I'm going to step back.
Mm,
And that's kind of how it works. Like you said, Tammy, the system fights you, it pulls you back in. You can feel guilty. You can miss the person who's been objectively unbearable for the last 3 years. So it is really hard to get on our own 2 feet to differentiate and to say, listen, I have to plot my own path to happiness. I can't rely on what you permit or what you're able to do. I have to be really clear about what my parameters are. And both parties essentially need to be able to do that from a healthy, clear, undistorted place. And then it really is a choice between two people. Hey, if we want a really happy relationship, there's things that I'm going to have to learn how to do that don't come naturally for me to support you in the happiness and the life you want. If I'm not interested in doing that, how fair of a relationship is this? And you're going to have to do the same for me. We watch each other's back. We work to make this good because we realize, again, good relationships are not ready made. They're earned, not given.
okay, that was helpful. Thank you. The next one is betrayed here. My husband was raised in a family where everyone operates as a single person system. Now that he is in sobriety, he is coming to the realization that he literally does not understand how a man needs to operate in a relationship. When he learned from his father was as long as he brings in the money, he can do as he pleases and he doesn't know how to communicate on a human emotional level. Is it better for him to see a therapist or a coach to learn these skills? That's a great question.
Oh, that is
And
such an
wow, what a
awesome question.
realization too. Like, isn't that amazing that there's a realization?
Yeah. So before we split on coach or
Okay.
therapist, um, there's a book I have to recommend. If you don't have a concept or you feel like you have a fuzzy concept of how relationships are supposed to function, Wired for Love is one of the best things that I have ever read. From a psychobiological perspective, meaning we take everything into account. And it's less prescriptive of this type of relationship. Everyone must do this. And it's more of, it's as general of an owner's manual as you can get for being in a relationship. So different people have different needs. There's different attachment backgrounds. In fact, anything that Stan Tatkin has written is really good in that direction. In fact, I've had clients individually. I'll recommend reading that book when they're struggling with relationship context, and I get one of two responses, and they're both authentic. Sometimes I'll get the response that says, "Okay, wow, like I realize how far off my belief system is. I realize how skewed I am on this, and I know I need to adopt some new perspectives, some new principles, and I want to work at this." I've had guys read Wired for Love and they come back and say, I feel terrible saying this, but I'm not interested.
Oh, wow.
I'm
Okay.
not interested in a relationship that functions that way. And those guys that do that, they tend to be more narcissistic, like on the diagnosable level. And if that's the case, I understand this, I see it, I can even accept that my partner wants this, but I'm not interested in giving it. The only kind thing they can do is to cut their partner loose fairly and say you'll never be happy with me because I don't want what you want. And so it's interesting. I've seen security in relationships come out of both angles. The security for the person who wants the relationship to say, okay, I get it, I'll grow up, I'll figure this out. And the security for the more narcissistic person who doesn't really want an intimate relationship to say, I'll be fair with you, we'll co-parent well, all of that. And I want you to go have, the love and the support that you want. Who am I to keep you from that just because I'd have to face a loss? So that's a good place to start when someone is saying, "How do I even do this?" It's a good place to start. Now, therapist or coach, here's what should be the difference. And I say should because I think there are some coaches and there's some therapists who say I'm a coach so they don't have to do state licensing and stuff, which is not ethical. So a therapist is going to help you to look into your belief system, look into your feelings, is going to help you with integration. I would say a therapist is, maybe this is the wrong way to say it, but it's more of a medical approach. There are things to treat, there's structure, there's subconscious, and therapists have schooling and they have licensing requirements, continuing education requirements. It's a regulated field. A coach should only be focusing on behavioral aspects with you. So, what I would say, my personal preference or my personal take is being able to function in relationship isn't about acquiring skills. It's about having the right belief system, the right perspective that the right skills and behaviors emanate from. So, if, for example, if you've got the mental understanding of what empathy is, but you have a hard time executing it, a coach can drill empathy with you. If you have no concept of how a relationship is supposed to function, a coach can teach you how to show up and appear. You can get a nice hollow smile going, and there may not be substance there. So that would be my answer to that.
Okay. So then the next one is, what about the addict convincing himself that it's not working and betrayed partner's pain is too much for them, or that they're standing up for themselves by leaving without trying to communicate, set boundaries first? I feel like my PA takes advice from betrayed and applies it to himself to justify his actions.
Yeah, there's a lot of advice both for addicts and betrayed partners out there that I think is ultimately non-relational. It may be personally gratifying or personally relieving, but it may not have the relationship in mind. And that's I would say that has more to do with the problem that you're trying to fix. If I'm trying to fix my own discomfort, if I'm trying to fix my own lack of safety, you will approach it differently than if you're looking at, I'm trying to also make sure that this whole system can heal and we can work on that together. So, um, yeah, at the end of the day, goes back to the self-regulation. There's unpredictability and there's some disempowerment in a relationship. I can't control what happens in my partner. As much as the outcome I want may be just, I can't make it happen. So I've seen a lot of people use and abuse, misuse and distort therapy speak principles for their own gain, and I think that is more about that person's internal set point than it is. I mean, you can get bad advice too, but I was just thinking about some clients I worked with in the recent past, and I said to them in the session, I said, "Man, it's astounding. You two only hear what you want to hear, don't you?" Because at the end of the session, they would recap and they'd say, "Oh, I liked that you told me this." I, they're saying the self-serving version of what I told them. So that I think is a big indicator of maturity level and the seriousness of which they're taking it. I'm seeking my own comfort, not health or function here.
And with this one, I mean, I'm a little wondering about how early in the process it is. You know, we do all of this stuff really badly, especially early on. So if you are seeing that they're committed to the process and doing the work, it's all about, their actions. But yeah, I mean, it's why we recommend you each have your therapist so that you get the support that you need and the clarification, and this I subbed in on the drop-in group this morning for the betrayed partners, and they're talking about how the other women in there help them with the reality checks, like making sure that you're getting the support so that you're going like, yeah, that's crazy talk, and that person is still, clearly, not showing up like I need them to yet. And, but I'm seeing this level of progress. So they're making some forward motion. I think this is to the one that identified that, he didn't learn it. I'm really shocked and proud that he communicated that. I'm afraid that he is manipulating me. Can you talk a little bit about, that
Yeah.
fear point?
Yeah, so I think the difference between manipulation and a big sharp left turn we weren't expecting is, uh, are you going to get about the business of showing me and not telling me? So manipulation is about, can I distort your perspective now to get what I want right now versus can I set a course for myself and can I work it? So, this is one of those, like, it does take time, but you also don't have to like get strung along. Yeah, I want to do better. I want to do better. Not reading anything, not working with a therapist, no self-reflection, like none of that. That's a good indicator that there's manipulation. If it's, yeah, I realize I got to make a sharp left turn, then you'll see some action or there will be some openness to, I'm reading everything that I can find. I'm trying to find the right therapist to work with. I'm working in my 12-step community to get more involved in the service side of things and the relating to other side of things. I have to figure this out.
Yeah. And we talk about SMART goals, and I want to get better. What does that even mean? What step, how is it going to be measurable? I mean, all of those things. So there has to be clear, a clear plan and measurement of like, this is what it's going to look like, so that there's goals to work towards. Okay. Since disclosure in December of 23, my PA partner relapsed last winter. I discovered it. He didn't tell me as per our agreement. He claims he is now being honest with me, but it's almost impossible for me to believe him based on all the lying. And my daughter died last
Mm.
year. I'm so exhausted from all this trauma and feeling I can't handle living with him much longer. If I can't know he is at least being truthful with me about his behavior. Any suggestions on how to effectively communicate this to him without him saying, I'm putting a deadline on his recovery?
Yeah. So, first of all, I'm sorry to hear about your daughter and the betrayal. Um, I don't think you could make up a worse cocktail for someone to have to go through. I'm so sorry. Um, there's a difference between deadline on my recovery and I've reached the end of my rope. So again, here's differentiation. The truth is, and I've seen this with some people in recovery, the time they need to figure things out does not match the timeline that their partner can hang on and their partner can still do it. And that's a tragedy. But I would say overall, authenticity of a recovery and a recovery centered on the person who is recovering and their needs is best. That's recovery for the individual. The recovery for the coupleship, of course, is contingent on how much longer can both of us do this. Because it does take time and there's a lot of imperfection in the starts and the stops and things like that. So if your partner's listening to this, I would just say, hey, buddy, wrap your head around it. This is not a deadline on your recovery. This is your spouse telling you where the end of the rope is. And if you don't have any more gas in your tank and you can't get more fire under your feet, just be honest about that. I'm doing the best I can, and I realize it's not fair for me to ask you to keep holding on. If you got to go, I understand it. And you stay working your program if it's working for you. Um, so I actually had the thought here. Often I'll see with couples that the hard time they have coming up with effective solutions can have more to do with how they're describing the problem than it is, this is just impossible to solve. So what I hear in this, and this reminds me of a couple I worked with earlier this year, maybe it's not about how, because I hear this way this is set up is how does he get honest? As if honesty was just this bell that resonates in this frequency inside of us. What if or how would it change how you're looking at this to say, you know what? The issue that I'm having is I can't feel what's true or not, and I can't trust the feelings I have right now about truth. So how are we going to solve that problem? You see, it's focused on the same place. We have to get honesty at the center of this, but I've seen it time and time again, and there's no shade on any betrayed partner. Sometimes you can have someone who's impeccably honest, but because of how they betrayed and manipulated and distorted, it's extremely difficult for their partner to reach to a place where they can trust that. So maybe it's not just I don't trust you. Maybe it's I don't know what sense to make of these feelings I have as you're interacting with me. What are we going to do about that? So it's not turning the table or passing the buck. It's simply defining the problem from a different perspective. I need to get to a place where I can feel that you are being honest with me and I can trust those feelings. This is what I put out to that couple that I worked with earlier this year, and he had betrayed. He was camped out on this. I'm honest. I'm honest. I'm honest. What more do you want with me? When I framed it that way, he said, "I see it. I see
Mm,
it. This
good.
isn't just about me defending my honesty. Like I have to get way more gentle. I have to allow for more of your pace to figure things out because I'm wanting you to see my honesty and then pick up and run with me, and I'm recognizing that's exactly wrong. So sometimes we aren't effective at solving things or moving problems along because we maybe have not conceived about it totally. So that's one place I'd recommend looking. How does that change the problem you're looking at when you look at your need to be able to feel trust and to trust the feelings that you have?
We're almost out of time, but I want you to address this. How common is it for the betrayed spouse to become physically violent towards the addict due to his lies, gaslighting, unmet needs, and frustration? And how can the betrayed partner learn to regulate those emotions and that behavior rage?
Yeah, absolutely. It's normal. I would almost say expected. Now, um, that's not the same as me saying excusable. I don't think violence has any place in any relationship for any reason. So I think first of all, I applaud you at being able to look at this part of what's going on. And I think that's where it starts with any out of control, for whatever reason, behavior. It starts with getting honest about it. I'm full of rage, and that induces me to be violent with you, and that's not okay. So then, just like in addiction recovery, where we look at what are the boundaries I have to put in place when I'm sane, how am I going to plan for when I'm not sane? So that may look like I got to separate for a while. I got to take some anger management courses. I've got to get a punching bag. I've got to have someone I can talk to. Maybe I have to look at my own history of rage and abuse. It's not uncommon that I'll see that folks who tend to get physically violent when they're angry, there was violence perpetrated on them by an angry parent or an angry caregiver early on. So I would say it could help to create a separate and focused container for that. I gotta look at this independent from this because this is a problem for me.
We're out of time. Thank you all. Thanks, John. See you next time.